find bad CPU and GPU combos. Let's get you the best CPU and GPU combo in 2024. Welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. 2024 is a great time to build a PC with recent CPU launches and falling GPU prices. It's hard enough to get the best CPU for gaming and the best GPU for gaming by themselves. Combine them together for the best CPU and GPU combo, it's even harder. So we'll cover everything that you need to know and give you specific recommendations at every budget level to get you the best CPU and GPU combo for gaming or productivity in late 2024 and beyond. If you get value out of this video, please give a like because it makes a huge difference to the channel, and of course subscribe for more cool PC content. With that, let's jump into it. Let's start with bottlenecking, which means that one of our components is limiting our performance. If we could upgrade that component to make it faster, then our overall system performance would increase. Now, the most common bottleneck for a gaming PC build, it's the CPU versus the GPU. If our CPU is too slow to keep up with our graphics card, then increasing the speed of our CPU would give us more FPS. But if our GPU is our bottleneck, then getting a faster GPU instead would increase our FPS performance. The CPU is more likely to be bottlenecked when we are pushing huge amounts of frames, and our GPU is usually the bottleneck when we turn up the resolution from 1080p to 1440p to 4K, including if the GPU does not have enough VRAM to run the latest AAA titles on release at higher ultra settings. But here's the thing that even experienced PC builders get wrong. No matter what, our system will always have a bottleneck. The true art of being a PC builder, it's understanding how to maximize your PC build performance for your budget, whether that's in gaming, streaming, video editing, or heavy multi-threaded workloads. Once we figure that out, we want to spend most of our budget on the component that's bottlenecking our overall performance. Now for gaming, we want to maximize our FPS, or frames per second. That usually means getting the fastest GPU that we can afford while only buying a CPU that's not going to bottleneck the graphics card. The tighter our PC build budget, the more we need to get that balance right. Now, obviously, if we had tons of cash, we could throw our budget out and just get the best CPU and GPU period and spend about $4,000 for the ultimate gaming PC. But most PC builders have this thing called a budget that they need to work within. So choosing the best CPU and GPU combo will heavily impact your gaming performance. For example, say we want to build a 1440p gaming PC with a Ryzen 7600X CPU and RX 7700 XT 12GB GPU, and we decide to increase our budget another $100. Where should we spend it? We could upgrade the CPU to the Ryzen 7700X, which overall can be a bit faster than the Ryzen 7600X, but at this GPU performance level, it's only going to give us slightly more FPS because our GPU is generally the bottleneck, not the CPU. So we just spent our extra $100 on the Ryzen 7700X, not to mention more on cooling and possibly a bigger PSU as well, for about a 5% increase in FPS. Not great. Now instead, if we spent that extra $100 to jump up to an RX 7800 XT 16GB GPU, and we kept our Ryzen 7600 CPU, we'd pick up about 18% more FPS because we're spending our money smartly by upgrading the part that's actually bottlenecking our performance. We'll also jump up from 12GB of VRAM on our GPU to 16GB of VRAM, which is also nice. Remember that in 2024, there are an increasing number of games that bottleneck on graphics card VRAM and are recommending a minimum of 12GB of VRAM for 1440p gaming and 16GB for 4K gaming, along with enthusiast level ray tracing workloads. And remember that as we go up in resolution from 1080p to 1440p to 4K, that increases the load on the GPU and it decreases the load on the CPU. So it makes even more sense to upgrade the GPU. Let's jump into the recommendations for best CPU and GPU combo for gaming and productivity. We're going to go through both AMD Ryzen as well as Intel offerings. Right now, the relevant CPUs are the Ryzen 9000, 7000, and for budget builds, Ryzen 5000 series CPUs. On the Intel side, we've got the recently released and currently very buggy Intel Core Ultra 200 CPUs, and I currently recommend that consumers wait to see if Intel can fix their performance. They say they're working on it right now. I'll leave a note down in the pinned comment if I think they're good to go. We also have 13th and 14th gen Intel CPUs, which had degradation issues for parts that were rated at 65 watts TDP or higher. So essentially all the 13th and 14th gen CPUs except for the i3s. Intel now says that their latest BIOS update fixes these issues. I'm not ready to give them the all clear just yet, but we'll list them as well for informational purposes. We also have 12th gen Intel parts, which have not been implicated in the degradation issues, but those are mostly for budget builds at this point. Starting off at the ultra budget level, you can build a gaming PC right now for just about $500 US with all new parts. Note that I'm filming a couple weeks ahead of Black Friday and we're already seeing a ton of deals, so I'm using some of those sales prices. At this level, we really want the cheapest CPU platform that just won't bottleneck our GPU. Right now, Intel's i3-1200F and the AMD Ryzen 5500 are the cheapest decent options paired with a good budget motherboard, an $80 B660 Pro RS for the i3-1200F, and an $80 B550 Pro RS for the Ryzen 5500. Note the Ryzen 5500, it's only PCIe Gen 3, and cost cutting on some budget and mid-range GPUs requires these GPUs to now have PCIe Gen 4 in order to get the most out of them. For instance, the RX 7600 XT 16GB GPU, it loses about 11% performance when limited to PCIe Gen 3. So I heavily lean to the i3-1200F in this price class, and I recommend a B550 motherboard for the Ryzen 5500 if you're going to buy one, rather than a similarly priced B450 motherboard, so that if you upgrade your CPU to a Ryzen 5700X 3D in the future, you'll have PCIe Gen 4. Both CPUs come with very good included stock CPU coolers, and we're using both with a $43 kit of 2x16GB, DDR4, 3200 CL16 RAM, so 32 gigabytes total. Now, the total cost of these platforms is between $199 and $206. For our GPU, we could go all the way down to a used GTX 1070 8GB for about $100, or on the new market, a Radeon RX 6600 for $199, or an Intel Arc A580 GPU for just $165. There aren't really any good new NVIDIA options in this budget category. Both the i3-1200F and the Ryzen 5500, they're very capable CPUs, and you can push them up to an RX 7700 XT or RTX 4060 Ti 16GB performance, but that's essentially redlining them, and you'll want to look at a better CPU at that point. Here, I would prioritize getting to a recent GPU with more than 8GB of VRAM if you can, to be able to play the latest AAA titles on release at ultra settings, even at 1080p. The next CPU up that I would look to is either the AMD Ryzen 5600 for about $120, or the i5-12400F, currently selling for $111. Now, these CPUs have nearly identical performance, and with a GPU like an RX 6700 XT or RX 7600 XT 16GB, we'll see about a 10 to 15% FPS increase over the previous tier of CPUs. We go over builds for both of these CPUs in our Best Budget Gaming PC 2024 video, which is linked down in the video description under our builds playlist. We're essentially using an identical setup from the ultra budget category, an $80 B660 motherboard for the i5-12400, and $80 B550 motherboard for the Ryzen 5600. Avoid B450 as that will limit you to PCIe Gen 3. Now, once again, we've got a $43 kit of 2x16GB DDR4 3200 CL16 RAM, and the total upgrade cost of either of these comes out to be between $28 and $37. Honestly, it's so cheap that I definitely recommend the upgrade if you have the budget for it. Now, for our GPU combo, I look at a minimum of an RX 6600, RTX 3050, or Arc A580 new GPU. I recommend getting at least 12 gigabytes of VRAM on our GPU if we can. These CPUs scale pretty well, but begin to hit a wall right around the RX 7800 XT or RTX 4070, and at that point, you'll definitely want to jump up to the next tier of CPU performance. Note that if you need more cores for productivity, you can consider the Ryzen 5700X or Intel i5-12600K, but at this GPU level, they don't give much more gaming performance for the extra expense, both for the CPU itself and needing to buy an aftermarket cooler. And there's much better options, as we'll go over next. Jumping up to our mid-range CPU and GPU combo, we basically have three options here. With current pricing, the best value gaming CPU is either the Ryzen 7600 or 7600X for about $180 to $200. And there's really no performance difference between them. If we want a little bit more compute power, we could also look at either the Ryzen 9600X or Ryzen 7700X or 7700, though you won't get much more FPS performance with mid-range GPUs in most titles. On the Intel side, the i5 14600K and 13600K, they're priced pretty aggressively. You can grab an i5 13600KF right now for $175. That's largely due to their instability issues that Intel claims are now fixed with the latest rounds of BIOS updates, but I'm not yet ready to recommend them. We do have build guides for the Ryzen 7600 and 7600X, as well as the 9600X on the channel, and I'll leave them linked down in the build guide playlist below. These CPUs will give us about 25% more FPS using an RX 7800 XT or RTX 4070 over the previous CPU tier in the Ryzen 5600 and i5-12400F, especially in CPU-limited titles or competitive shooters like CS2. For the Ryzen 7600 and 9600X, we're going to use a budget tower air cooler like the Thermalright Assassin X for about $25, a mid-range B650 Micro ATX motherboard for about $140 like the ASRock B650M Pro RS, and a $100 kit of 2x16GB, so 32GB total, of DDR5 6000 CL30. For the i5-14600K, we're using a DDR5 Z690 or Z790 motherboard for about $140 and as little as $128 like the ASRock Z790 Pro. Like the Ryzen systems, we're using that same DDR5 6000 CL30 kit for $100 and a mid-range air cooler like the Thermalright Phantom Spirit SE for $40. That makes our upgrade cost over the previous tier between $209 for the Ryzen 7600 and $269 for the Ryzen 9600X. Along with $221 for the i5-13600KF. For our GPU combo, given how much we're spending on the CPU platform now, we want a minimum of an RX 7700 XT, currently around $370, or RTX 4060 Ti 16GB, around $440 at the time of filming. If you're not sure of what GPU to get, check out our best GPU for gaming monthly update linked down in the video description. We can take either of these CPUs all the way up to the RX 7900 XTX or even the RTX 4090, and likely the RX 8000 series GPUs and GPUs up to an RTX 5080, but those haven't been announced at the time of filming. At that point, if we still have money left over in our budget, it makes a lot of sense to upgrade this CPU because those are currently the fastest GPUs available. Now, if you're trying to decide between these, my inclination is to go with the Ryzen 7600 or 7600X over the alternatives. You do get that future upgradability on the AM5 platform, and you can drop in a future Ryzen 9800X3D or 11800X3D, whatever they call Zen 6 X3D, and you can get the biggest GPU budget right now, so that seems like a win-win to me. While it is nice to see aggressive pricing on the 13th and 14th gen Intel, given the degradation issues, I'm not ready to give them the all clear and recommend it, and it's essentially on a dead-end platform, LGA 1700, with no future upgrades. For production users, my recommendation here, probably go with its slightly higher core count CPU. Ryzen 7700, 7700X are great values. They are beginning to discount through Ryzen 9000 series CPUs. Just know that they don't have a lot more performance than the 7000 series one, so don't overspend. And right now you can pick up good deals on like the 7900X or even the 7950X. Of course, we recently did our Ryzen 9950X build guide, so if you want the biggest, baddest production PC right now that doesn't have any bugs, check out that linked in the description. I do want to give a quick honorable mention to the Ryzen 5700X 3D. Now, at the time of filming, the 5700X 3D can be had for just under $200 US. If you're currently on AM4 with any non-X3D CPU, so Ryzen 1000, 2000, 3000, or even Ryzen 5000 series non-X3D CPU, the Ryzen 5700X 3D will deliver similar performance to the Ryzen 7600, often even beating it in really CPU-intensive titles. If I had one of those older Ryzen CPUs, even if I had to upgrade my RAM kit to a DDR4 3200CL16 one, that's potentially a very compelling upgrade. You could even consider a brand new build with it, and in that case, with a similar setup to the Ryzen 5600 build that we did in the previous tier, all we really need to do is add a mid-range cooler to it for about $40. Then the jump up from that Ryzen 5600 would cost you just $120 rather than $209 for the Ryzen 7600. Though you are now on a maxed out AM4 platform rather than AM5, and I think that $80 is probably worth it for the future upgradability, but I certainly could see a new build as viable as well. Now let's look at the current top tier of gaming CPUs in 2024. There are of course many options here, but for gaming, the main CPU for AMD, it's the Ryzen 9800X 3D for $479. You could consider the 7800X 3D if you can find it and find it at a lower price, but right now it's the same price, so I personally hold out for the 9800X 3D. Again, unless that 7800X 3D is offered at a significant discount. On the Intel side, their best option, unless they can fix the Core Ultra 200 series, is the i7-14700K or 13700K. Right now you can pick up an i7-13700KF for $286. But remember, I currently don't recommend these, although Intel does now say that they're fixed the degradation issues with the latest BIOS updates. Both these platforms are very similar to the mid-range examples. For the 9800X3D, we have a full build guide that we just released, so check that out linked down in the video description for tons of configuration options. In this particular example, I used a more mid-range B650 full-size ATX motherboard for $150, a mid-range air cooler like the Thermaltake Phantom Spirit SE120 for about $40, and the same DDR5 6000CL30 RAM kit for $100, which does bring us to a pricey $769 for just a CPU platform. On the Intel side, things are much more affordable due to massive price cuts, and we go with a $140 C790 motherboard, DDR5 6000CL30 RAM kit for $100, and the same Phantom Spirit CPU cooler for $40. That brings us to $576 for the Intel platform. With an RTX 4090 at 1080p, the i7-14700K does outperform the previous tier of CPUs, but the 9800X3D is about 20 to 30% faster on average. For our GPU combos, for a minimum, I'd recommend a Radeon RX 7900 GRE, currently selling for around $530, or the RTX 4070 Super for around $600. Now, ideally, we'd want the fastest GPU possible, so an RX 7900 XTX for AMD, currently selling for $820, and the currently $1,800 RTX 4090, or possibly the upcoming RTX 5080 or 5090. Especially for the 9800X3D, the faster the GPU, the more value we're getting out of our CPU. For production users, the i7-14700K is actually a very good option. On the Ryzen side, rather than going with a 9800X3D, I would look to a higher core count CPU part like the Ryzen 9900X, 7900X, 7950X, or again, the current king of unbugged production, the 9950X, and we have a build guide for the Ryzen 9950X on the channel right now. Check it out, linked in the video description. We also do expect higher core count X3D CPUs launched sometime in early 2025, possibly the 9950X3D and 9900X3D. Of course, we expect big sales for Black Friday, the holiday shopping season, and into early 2025, so we've linked all the relevant CPUs and GPUs mentioned in this video down in the video description. Check out those links for updated pricing in your region. If you got value out of this video, please give it a like, it makes a huge difference to the channel, and of course subscribe for cool PC content. If you want a deep dive into picking the best GPU for gaming in 2024 right now, check out our monthly look at the GPU market, where we go through the best GPU for gaming in every budget category, linked right here. Check it out, and we'll catch you on the next one.